He tossed the puppy like trash, off a cold, rusted bridge with no one watching, or so he thought. But fate was watching, and what happened next would leave even the coldest hearts shattered. In a quiet town wrapped in silence and old secrets, where the river ran beneath broken bridges and time seemed to forget its way, a moment was born. A cruel moment that should have ended in tragedy. No one would have known if it weren't for what happened next. That morning had started like any other. A still breeze kissed the worn rooftops, and the birds whispered songs no one cared to hear. But under that silence, a heartless act was brewing, an act that would be witnessed by neither law nor crowd, only by fate. The man had no name, at least none worth remembering. Locals called him Rusty. Not because he was old, but because his presence left behind the stench of decay. Jobless, angry, and bitter at life, Rusty found amusement in cruelty. That day, he carried a tiny box tucked beneath his oversized jacket. Inside it whimpered a creature too young to even defend itself. A puppy with trembling fur and innocent eyes that didn't understand betrayal. He approached the bridge like he'd done it before. No camera, no witness, just cracked pavement and rusty rails. The puppy whimpered louder. Rusty didn't flinch. And then he threw. But stories, real stories, never end at the fall. The splash echoed in the silence like a slap across the sky. The water, freezing cold and fast-moving, swallowed the puppy whole. His tiny body struggled beneath the surface, paddling, gasping, spinning. His name wasn't known yet. He didn't even have a name, but something inside him refused to let go. The current dragged him downstream, bumping his frail body against stones and roots. His soft yelps were barely whispers in the roaring flow. But the river, as cruel as it seemed, had its own strange mercy. It didn't pull him under. It carried him, gently but painfully, toward something unexpected. Downstream, just past a cluster of overgrown willows, sat a small wooden dock. And on that dock, sitting with a fishing rod and a half-empty cup of coffee, was a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in days. Ethan. Ethan didn't think, he just reacted. As soon as he spotted that tiny body bobbing down the river, something cracked open inside him. He dropped his fishing rod and sprinted across the dock. His boots slammed onto the wood, echoing through the trees. Without a second thought, he leaped into the freezing river, arms slicing through the current. The water was ice cold, wrapping around him like chains, stealing his breath. But he fought it. His eyes searched desperately through the blur of water and foam until he saw the weak, flailing movement. Just a scrap of fur trying to stay above the surface. He reached the puppy in seconds, but it felt like hours. The pup wasn't moving anymore. Ethan scooped the lifeless little body into his arms and kicked hard toward the bank, lungs screaming, heart pounding. By the time he dragged himself up the muddy slope, the puppy's chest wasn't rising. His tongue hung limp, his soaked fur clung to his frail bones. "No, no, no," Ethan gasped. "Don't do this. Not today." He laid the puppy gently in the grass and started pressing 2 fingers to its ribcage. His hands were trembling, water dripping from his sleeves. A part of him, the old broken part, told him it was already too late. But another voice inside him, one he hadn't heard in years, whispered, "Try." So he did. He pushed, waited, pressed again, waited, pressed again. Then finally a sound. A cough. Tiny, wet gag. Then a whimper. The puppy opened its eyes. Confused, terrified, but alive. Ethan collapsed next to the pup, panting, wet, shaking but smiling for the first time in years. He hadn't smiled since Emma. 3 years ago, Ethan had been a different man. A husband. A father. He had a daughter named Emma with golden curls and a laugh that could melt glaciers. One summer afternoon, while Ethan was stuck at work, a drunk driver ran a red light. In a heartbeat, his world turned silent. Since then, Ethan had withdrawn from everything. Friends, neighbors, even his own brother stopped visiting. He moved to the outskirts, bought a rundown cottage by the river, and tried to disappear. But today, something had changed. Today, a small broken life had found its way into his hands, and for the first time in years, he felt responsible for something other than his grief. He wrapped the puppy in his flannel shirt and walked home through the tall grass. The puppy rested against his chest, eyes fluttering but alive. "Let's get you warm," Ethan whispered. Inside his cottage, the fireplace hissed to life, casting orange glows across dusty furniture. Ethan placed the puppy in a shoebox lined with old towels and placed it near the fire. The pup shivered, tiny paws twitching, eyes opening now and then. Ethan boiled some chicken and mashed it into bits. He dipped a finger into the broth and gently touched the puppy's lips. First nothing, then a small lick. "That's it," Ethan said softly. "You've got fight in you." He watched for hours, checked every breath, every flicker of movement. He didn't notice the time pass. The sun had long gone down by the time he blinked at the clock. He hadn't felt this alive in years. The next morning brought light and questions. The puppy was still weak but now looked up at Ethan with trusting, glistening eyes. Tried to lift its head and gave a soft whimper. Ethan reached into the box and gently petted its head. "I guess I need a name for you, huh?" The puppy licked his finger, and for the first time Ethan chuckled. A low, surprised, genuine sound. "Okay," he said. "How about Lucky?" The pup wagged its tail weakly. "Lucky it is." Over the next few days, Lucky regained strength. At first, he couldn't stand properly. His legs wobbled and his balance failed him. But he was determined. Every stumble was followed by another try. Ethan would clap softly and encourage him, whispering, "Come on, little guy. You've got this." Lucky would fall, then try again. It reminded Ethan so much of when Emma had learned to walk. The same small steps, the same determination, the same sense of wonder and achievement over something simple. It hurt, but it also healed. As the days passed, Ethan found himself smiling more. He cleaned the place, cooked meals again. He even found an old toy box of Emma's in the attic and cried as he placed one of her soft blankets beside Lucky's bed. "I think she would have liked you," he said softly. Lucky responded by snuggling deeper into the blanket. A week later, Lucky could walk, run, and bark. Not just any bark, though. This was a wild, joyful sound that echoed through the trees as if it had been waiting years to be heard. Lucky chased leaves, barked at squirrels, and jumped in the river, which Ethan had to discourage to his amusement. But just as happiness was returning, so was the past. One evening, while walking through town to buy dog food, Ethan overheard two boys talking near the grocery store. "Did you hear about that dog someone threw off the bridge?" "Yeah, my uncle saw it happen. Said some guy did it before. Sicko lives in a trailer near the woods. Why doesn't anyone stop him? No one wants to get involved. He's crazy." Ethan froze. It wasn't a random act. Rusty had done this before, and no one had stopped him. He looked down at the bag of food in his hand and clenched his jaw. He had to do something. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He watched Lucky curled up by the fireplace, breathing gently, paws twitching from dreams. He had saved one life, but how many had been lost before Lucky? And how many more would follow? He stared out the window at the stars, gripping the edge of the sill. "I won't let him hurt another." The next morning, Ethan drove to the police station. He showed them pictures of Lucky, explained what he had seen, and even told them about the kids' conversation. The officer nodded slowly. "You say he's done this before?" Ethan nodded. "The kids knew. The town knows. But no one's reporting it." The officer sighed. "We need evidence. Witnesses." "I'll get you both," Ethan replied. Ethan didn't just want justice, he wanted change. Over the next week, he spoke to neighbors, approached the kids again, and even recorded short interviews with anyone who had seen or suspected Rusty's actions. Slowly, he pieced together a timeline, a history. He submitted it all. A week later, the police knocked on Rusty's trailer. They found 2 boxes in the shed. One was empty, the other wasn't. Rusty was arrested. News spread fast. Social media caught wind, and soon the town was buzzing. But more importantly, the animal shelter that worked with the police came forward. They needed a local foster program. Someone reliable, compassionate. They asked Ethan. At first, he hesitated. But when Lucky ran between his legs and barked happily at the shelter manager, he knew his answer. The last scene of that chapter was this: Ethan standing under the same bridge where the story began. Not to forget, but to promise. He placed a collar around Lucky's neck, one with a tag that read "Rescued," "Loved," "Home." And then they walked away, not broken, but beginning. Ethan had never imagined his life would take this turn. Not at this stage and not like this. The bridge that once symbolized pain and cruelty had now become a starting point. A symbol of rescue, courage, and a promise to protect those who couldn't speak for themselves. The town's reaction to Rusty's arrest had been louder than Ethan expected. Social media had taken the story beyond their small community. The video of Lucky's rescue, now paired with the clip of Ethan giving his first public statement outside the police station, had gone viral. Millions of people had watched and cried, commented and shared. Some called Ethan a hero. Others said Lucky was the miracle. But Ethan didn't care about labels. He only cared that the silence was broken, that justice had, for once, outshouted cruelty. Days passed and then weeks. Ethan's home wasn't so quiet anymore. The animal shelter had followed through on their proposal, officially launching a local foster program for abused and abandoned animals. And they had one man in mind to be its heart. "You saved one, Ethan," the director had said over coffee. "Now, how would you feel about saving many?" At first, he hesitated. His life had just started healing. Opening that wound to help others would mean reopening pieces of himself he had carefully buried. But one night, after Lucky fell asleep curled around a foster kitten they had just taken in, Ethan knew the answer. He said yes. The new chapter began simply. The shelter arranged a small meet and greet event to welcome the first foster animals. There were dogs and cats, some scared, some curious, all in need of care. Ethan arrived with Lucky by his side. As soon as they entered the shelter room, many of the animals froze, unsure of this man, this space. But Lucky walked right up to a shaking beagle puppy, sat down and wagged his tail. In moments, the beagle crept forward and licked Lucky's nose. That one tiny moment started a wave of peace through the room. Whimpers faded. Curious tails wagged. Even the cats grew still. It was as if Lucky had become more than a survivor. He was now a healer. Ethan's house transformed. What was once a quiet, grief-stricken home became a space of energy, noise, and purpose. He converted Emma's old playroom into a makeshift recovery space for animals. Soft bedding, gentle lighting, and a wall filled with photos. Not of the past, but of every animal who found a second chance under that roof. Lucky was a natural leader. He greeted every new arrival with calm interest. He played gently with the injured, gave space to the fearful, and curled beside the ones who cried at night. Ethan watched, day after day, his heart learning to beat again. But the past has a way of whispering even in moments of peace. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of bottle-feeding newborn kittens and helping a three-legged Labrador adjust to the house, Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, watching Lucky through the window. The dog was sitting at the edge of the yard, gazing at the river as the sunset bathed the world in gold. It was the same spot where Ethan had first brought Lucky home, half dead and broken. He stepped outside, quietly joining his companion. "You ever think about it?" he asked, mostly to himself. "What you went through?" Lucky turned and gently nudged Ethan's leg, as if to say, "Only sometimes. I'm more interested in what's ahead." Ethan smiled. A week later, Ethan received a letter, handwritten and stamped from a neighboring state. Inside was a note. "I saw what you did. I used to think people like you didn't exist. But your story gave me courage. I rescued a pit bull last month. His name is Banner. He's terrified of people, but he's starting to trust me. Thank you." No name, no return address, just a drawing of a pit bull paw print in blue ink. Ethan stared at the note for a long time. Then he pinned it to his wall right above Lucky's photo. The more animals Ethan helped, the more he noticed something changing in himself. He began speaking at schools about kindness. He volunteered to help train shelter volunteers. He gave interviews, something the old Ethan would have laughed at. One day, after a public talk about animal empathy, a little girl approached him shyly. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a t-shirt that read, "Dog Lover Forever," and held a scribbled crayon drawing of Lucky. "This is for your dog," she said, holding it out. "He's my hero." Ethan took the drawing with trembling hands. "Thank you," he said, kneeling to her level. "He's my hero too." Ethan began organizing a local campaign with the shelter, Project Lucky. Its goal: end animal abuse in their county by spreading awareness and training foster families. They launched with a small event near the bridge. That same bridge. It wasn't easy. Standing in front of that railing again stirred something in Ethan. The memory of fear, loss, rage. But he looked beside him and there was Lucky, tail wagging, looking ahead. With dozens gathered around, Ethan spoke into the mic. 2 years ago, a man threw a puppy off this bridge, and that moment changed my life. He told the full story for the first time. Not just of the rescue, but of Emma, the grief, the silence, and the journey back to life. "I thought I was saving Lucky," he said at the end. "But maybe he saved me first." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Reporters took notes. Kids hugged their own dogs tighter. Volunteers passed out information about fostering, donations, rescue tips. That bridge was no longer a symbol of cruelty. It had become the place where hope began. Ethan and Lucky went home tired that night, but something had shifted. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about legacy. Over the next few months, Project Lucky expanded to other towns. Shelters called to learn how to model their own foster homes after Ethan's. Former abusers turned whistleblowers. Laws were proposed locally to increase punishment for animal cruelty. Ethan, once invisible, had become a leader. But at home, he was still just dad to Lucky, who still begged for bacon, hogged the bed, and barked at leaves like they were deadly threats. One cold November morning, Ethan woke up early. He found Lucky sitting beside Emma's old blanket, staring at the doorway. A new foster pup had arrived the night before, blind, shaking, and silent. But now the pup was inching toward Lucky, following the sound of soft tail wags. Lucky lowered his head, nose touching the pup's. The puppy froze, sniffed, then curled beside him, safe, warm, unafraid. Ethan leaned against the doorway, tears blurring his vision. He whispered, "You're doing it again, boy." The soft crunch of leaves filled the air as Ethan walked along the tree-lined trail that wound through Emma's field. It had been nearly a year since the sanctuary had opened, and still, every step on that soil felt sacred. He paused near the wooden sign at the entrance. Love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be given. His fingers brushed over Emma's name carved into the wood. He smiled gently. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered. "We did it." Behind him, paws patted gently. Lucky, now slightly graying around the muzzle, trotted up and pressed against his leg, as if answering back. The sanctuary had grown far beyond Ethan's dreams. Where once stood only silence and memory, now stood a thriving refuge. Tails wagged in the breeze. Laughter echoed from volunteers. Broken dogs found healing one by one, just as Ethan had. There was Molly, the three-legged shepherd who led playtime like a queen. Ollie, a blind beagle who used his nose like radar. And Scout, the husky who once flinched at every sound but now howled joyfully every morning. Ethan didn't just save dogs. He created a world where they could live again. One crisp morning, Ethan received a message that felt like fate. A teenage boy named Micah had lost his parents in a car crash. He had stopped speaking, wouldn't go to school, wouldn't leave his room. Micah's aunt had heard about Emma's field and begged for help. Ethan wasn't a therapist. He knew that, but something told him this wasn't about qualifications. It was about heart. He said yes. Micah arrived a week later. 14, pale, hood pulled low, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. He didn't speak, didn't look up. Ethan didn't push him. Instead, he introduced him to Lucky. "This is my best friend," Ethan said. "He saved my life." Micah said nothing, just stared at the dog. Lucky wagged his tail once, then walked over and placed his paw gently on Micah's shoe. It was small, almost invisible, but Ethan saw it. Micah blinked, then looked down. That afternoon, Ethan watched from the porch as Micah sat under a tree. Lucky lay beside him. No words, just presence. A few feet away, Bella bounced toward them with a tennis ball. She dropped it at Micah's feet and wagged her tail furiously. Micah picked up the ball, tossed it. Bella chased it. He smiled, and in that moment Ethan knew healing had begun. That story made national headlines. Hero dog saves blind companion in midnight storm. Networks reached out. Talk shows called. But Ethan declined them all. He didn't want fame. He wanted peace and purpose. But one story he didn't turn down was from a children's book author named Claire, whose daughter had been deeply moved by the article. "I want to write a book about Lucky," Claire said, "for kids who've lost hope, who need someone like him." Together, they created Lucky's Bridge, a picture book that told the real story, filled with emotion and heart. It became a bestseller. Donations flooded in. The sanctuary expanded, adding a veterinary clinic, a play barn, and even cabins for children facing trauma to visit and heal alongside the dogs. Ethan often said, "Lucky built this. I just held the hammer." Years passed. Lucky aged gracefully, his steps slower, his eyes a little cloudy, but his heart just as bright. He trained younger dogs now. Daisy, Bella, and even Ollie became mentors for new rescues. They carried on the torch he lit. One fall morning, Ethan found Lucky lying in the sun, head resting on the porch step. He was peaceful, still. Ethan knelt beside him, pressed his forehead gently against Lucky's. Tears came, soft, silent, and grateful. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." They buried Lucky beneath the old oak tree. Beside the grave, a small stone read, "Lucky." He fell, but he rose. He healed, and then healed the world. People came from towns away to leave flowers. Kids painted rocks with paw prints and angel wings. Micah, now tall and strong, placed a picture of his younger self, sitting under that tree beside the grave. He whispered, "You gave me back my voice." Ethan stood beside the tree, surrounded by dogs, young and old. He looked out over the field, Emma's field. It was quiet for a moment. Then, a breeze rustled the leaves, and Ethan could almost hear her voice. "You did good, Daddy." And so, the story of a thrown puppy became the story of redemption, of love, of second chances. A man lost everything, and in saving a dog, he saved himself and countless others. Glowing Star, thank you for watching. Glowing Star, if this story touched your heart even a little, please don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your support helps us keep telling these emotional, true-to-life stories that the world needs to hear. Speech Balloon Paw Prints. Subscribe for more soul-stirring journeys, because sometimes, even the smallest act of kindness can spark a miracle. Sparkling Heart. Sparkles, what's one moment in this story that stayed with you? Let us know below. We read every comment.